Everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. They are always exciting. I am delighted to be joined on this episode by author Nick Bruel. Nick, thank you for jumping on Zoom. We've already had a really good conversation, just sort of the pregame show, and really enjoyed talking to you. And glad to share your words with some folks out there, some educators and readers and listeners who might be familiar with your work or who might be discovering it for the first time.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. Thank you so much for having me. As I was saying, like you said in our pregame, um, opportunities to talk to adults on an adult podcast on adult subjects in an adult environment don't come often to people who do what I do. So this is terrific. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this.
Absolutely. I will make it as childlike as I can, but we do tend, the atmosphere of the background, the digital background of multiple books seems to convey the aesthetic. And I also just use the word aesthetic, so it's got to be for adults, right?
Oh yeah, we're gonna put the schmancy into fancy for this group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're smearing it on. Um, so you're a person who is known for writing and creating for young people, which
Mhm.
we've kind of alluded to. What was it about writing and the written word that kind of drew you in and attracted you to this world of writing? And was it initially youth that you thought about writing for?
It wasn't initially. For me, you could say, I guess this part of the story and for my career begins in college when, um, even though I had entered college on a pre-med program and was sort of positioning myself to apply for medical schools, I'd always really enjoyed writing and especially drawing art. So an opportunity arose my junior year in college to have the campus comic strip on the by college newspaper. I went to Haverford College outside of Philadelphia, and I genuinely enjoyed creating this comic strip once a week for the newspaper more than anything else I was doing in college, and it just sort of sparked this sort of creative vibrancy in me that might not have been there otherwise. So I actually started writing plays that I would put up on stage in addition to the comic strip. So I left college fully anticipating that I was going to dedicate myself to a career in cartooning. I wanted to have a syndicated comic strip. And in order to support this radical lifestyle, I developed for myself. I worked as a bookseller for over 15 years. Initially for a general bookstore called Shakespeare and Company that's no longer there on the Upper West Side. Well, there's a different one now there. But then for a children's bookstore called Books of Wonder that is still there. Now it's on 17th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues. And at that point, I'd already been creating cartoons and I had a self-syndicated comic strip. So I was getting by okay, just creatively with my cartoons. But after working at that bookstore for probably maybe at this point 3 4 years, it sort of struck me one day that picture books and comics and cartoons shared the same language of telling a story with words and pictures. um, I had attempted to submit work, picture book ideas to publishers previously, and I'd come to understand over the years that the big obstacle that prevented me from actually getting those work published were that they were terrible. It was after working at that bookstore for a few years and really just being immersed in the history and the culture and the art of picture books that I really started to create manuscripts from ideas that could work. And once I'd done that, it happened quickly. But luck also played a key role. The woman who would become my agent was a regular customer who heard I was working on something through the grapevine, and we set up a meeting, and she was as shocked as I was that she wanted to sign me up. And the man who would become my first editor was a good friend of a former store manager, and he put us together. And it's just been this terrific ride ever since.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that. And my life has also seemingly centered around books. I told you I used to be a librarian, and then I became an English teacher, and then a literacy professor, and then an English teacher again. So, shout out to the bibliophile, and at least the two of us, and probably people that are listening out there as well. Bet. Curious about, you said that you were playwriting was part of your development too. So does that, forgive the pun, play a role in putting together the work that you do? Do you do kind of that scripting stage that I see so often in comics?
Yeah, I don't know what role it might play in the types of stories I tell now, but I have found that over since and all these years, the facet of writing that comes most naturally to me is dialogue. I have a much easier time writing dialogue than I do anything else, which actually, I guess now you say it, probably does lend towards my creating graphic novels, which essentially the Bad Kitty books are, because they're
Mhm.
so visual that I don't have to actually write um, anything that's descriptive, because I'm drawing it. It's right there in front of you, now in vibrant color. Uh,
Mhm.
all that's left is the interaction of between the characters, which is all dialogue driven, except I painted myself into a corner from the very beginning because I created a protagonist who does not talk. So that's where Kitty's dialogue has to come out through her facial expressions.
Mhm.
And that is the thing that's probably challenged me most over the years, as somebody who writes and illustrates these stories for a living. Because you'll notice that in what I described in all of that history of my college life and all that,
Mhm.
art school was not a part of any of it. I never spent a day um, formally as an in art school. I took art classes after college at the School of Visual Arts, sort of. And most of them were writing. But the only reason I paint and color at all was because some of the magazines and trade journals that I was submitting cartoons to, they would pay me $25 if they bought a cartoon in black and white, but they'll pay me $60 if it was color. I was like,
Mhm.
whoa, I gotta learn how to paint. That's phenomenal. So,
Right, right.
um, yeah, the long-winded answer is short version of the long-winded answer is that yes, the playwriting takes part in terms of the dialogue that I use, writing my stories.
Yeah. And shout out to the economy of it too, because I'm sure that if poetry paid all sorts of amounts of money, I would probably still be cranking out poems left and right. I used to do that all the time. And now I'm more of a person who does like blogs and book chapters and things like that, because you tend to go where uh, not only the creativity lies and where you're inspired, but where it makes sense to do that too.
Oh yeah. Well, while I was trying to become a cartoonist or set up my career as one, I was writing short stories to because that's what my concentration was in college. And yeah, journals, trade journals and such, they would pay you in copies of the journal. You would have the privilege of getting your work published in the journal, and your honorarium, if you will, would be copies of the journal
Yes. Yeah.
that you can put on your shelf and share with your parents so as proof that you weren't completely wasting your time.
Yes. Oh, yes. I remember trying that out too, and getting paid in those, and paid in rejection slips quite a bit too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that I mentioned that I'm former academic and still do academic kind of things, but not full time at the moment. And as an academic, you get to write, and part of your pay is that you get to write. That's sort of what it is, and you might get
Right.
a
Yeah,
PDF of your stuff. Um,
that's right.
but but not even all the journals send you a copy, because not even all the journals publish a printed copy. So
That's right. You get a digital file.
that's
You
right.
can
Here's your portable
you get
data file.
you can put that up on your it can be your screensaver is your payment now. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I should get one and put it back behind me on my Zoom meetings. That might be overwhelming. Um, so Bad Kitty, you mentioned it's a graphic novel. It draws on picture books. It draws on a variety of things, and I also love books that sort of defy clean and neat descriptions, hybrid texts.
Hmm.
So it kind of takes those visual pieces. Anything that you want to share for folks? I'll mention it's a multi entry ongoing series, but anything that you want to share for folks that may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, it's really interesting that you described it as a hybrid, because when the first chapter book came out, Bad Kitty Gets a Bath,
Mm.
Kirkus reviews described it as a graphic hybrid. They didn't call it a chapter book. They didn't call it a graphic novel. They created this designation, so far as I could tell, because I'd never seen it before, of graphic hybrid, which I thought was tremendous. But
Mm-hmm.
what I think might be getting lost in the history of Bad Kitty is that she actually started as a picture book character. And there's a little bit of visual aids.
Love it. Love it.
I prepared ahead of time. This is actually the first Bad Kitty book. She was a
Love
picture book
it.
character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a picture book that goes through the alphabet. It's a simple story. It's a story about this cat who doesn't get the food she wants in alphabetical order. And so she commits all these acts of mayhem in alphabetical order, but then she does get the food she wants in alphabetical order and more or less makes amends in alphabetical order. So I created this picture book, and it's coming on up on 20 years. It came out in 2005. Um, and I did a sequel called Poor Puppy about the dog. That's also it's introduced at the very end of the book. And I wanted to do more with the character, but I didn't know how I could continue this sort of multiple alphabet picture book format that I had created. It was untenable. So this idea occurred to me, and it's something I've been contemplating for a long time, about creating a scenario where the character can grow up with her readers. So rather than do a picture book about the character, adapt her into a heavily illustrated chapter book format. So kids who know the character from the picture book um, can move on to read about the character in the chapter book, and to create it in such a way that it would be like a bridge from picture books to chapter books. Keep it
Mm-hmm.
heavily illustrated, but also tell stories that would be at least 144 pages. Um, Initially, the only people who liked this idea were me, my editor, and the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it, because Barnes and Noble did not want to carry the first Bad Kitty chapter book. They saw
Funny.
they didn't understand it. It made no sense to them. Bear in mind that Barnes and Noble at the time, it may still be the case, had a separate buyer for picture books and another buyer for all of the others, like chapter books up through young adult. And
Yeah.
so the chapter book buyer was less familiar with the picture book. They said, why would anybody who reads a picture book get the chapter book? It made no sense to them. So they begrudgingly bought only 1,000 copies for the entire Barnes and Noble, um, every single store in North America and their online presence. Um, since then, they have amended those figures.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. but it really was interesting that it was a bit of a challenge to convince retailers that this was a good direction to take with the character. And part
Yeah.
of it was because it really had not been done before. Adapting a picture book character in for an older audience, and it was I really researched this, and only one other person had ever done this before. It was a character called Amazing Grace that appeared as a picture book, and but then as a middle grade novel, and also with like a period of 5 years in between, and just the two. So it and it had mixed results. Now there are a lot of picture book characters who are turned into chapter book series, like Fancy Nancy and Arnie the Donut. Now that's a great one, and a few others. And I honestly, more the better. I'm fine with it. But I think I was first.
Yeah. Well, and it's an insight into readers, that they can grow, that they can change with a book, that the book can be sort of waiting for them. And you might even have a reader who wants to reach kind of beyond where they are and have the
Yes.
motivation to read something that's maybe a little more challenging, but still worth it. And especially if they've got those pictures to support them. So I'm not wearing a hat, but hats off to you for thinking that through and sharing that with the world. And I'm glad that Barnes and Noble revisited that choice.
Yes.
That's good.
So am I.
Yeah.
But you bring up an interesting point, because I do draw upon my book retail experience quite a bit, even to this day, when I'm considering how to tell my stories. Because when I was a bookseller, I would get the question every day. I have a book for a 5, 6, 7 year old whatever child I need to get books for, and
Mhm.
my suggestion every single time was to aim high. Get them a book that they'll grow into, rather than one that they'll grow out of quickly, or they've
Yeah.
already grown out of. It's one of the reasons I do not, and I think it's the conventional wisdom now, and it wasn't always with children's books. I do not edit my vocabulary. If
Mhm.
I'll put whatever word I think is going to work best, if it's funny or tells a story, whatever it may be. I don't care if it's a vocabulary word for an eighth, ninth, 10th grader, what have you. It goes in the books, because the kids will figure it out by context. And the
Absolutely.
kids who are going to pick up a book like mine, in fact, they'll demand it. So uh, yeah, my book retail, what still guides me to this day.
Daniel Handler slash Lemony Snicket had
Yeah,
just that great built-in a word which here means, that sort of like
right.
built in. Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned before in the pregame show that you do virtual visits with children. I'm
Yeah.
curious about one of the moments a child has surprised you with a reaction or a question.
Um, Interesting.
I
You know,
tried. I tried.
yeah, it's funny, because I've been ruminating on one recently, because about a month ago I did a virtual visit with a school in Vancouver, I believe it was, in Canada. And uh I believe she was a fourth grader. It was a girl, and she kind of stumped the band on this one. She asked me what was my greatest priority as a writer. It was a question I had never really been asked before, and it was a very profound one. So it really did lead to 10 seconds of full silence before I was able to just sort of spout out an answer. And I still don't think it was necessarily the best answer. And which tells you I've been dwelling on all this time. It's like, I think my priority as a writer is to um act as a delivery system of a vessel that will both amuse and educate my readers. Uh, I'm still not really sure if that's the right answer, that I or the answer that is true, because it was just, it's an intriguing use of that word
Yeah,
priority.
I love that.
And one of these days I will approach the few author, illustrator, writer types that I encounter, and ask their opinion on it, because it was a really intriguing question.
Truly enough, yeah. I love how kids very often don't get enough credit. And I've had those moments where, to my
Yeah,
chagrin, we'll be reading something in class and a student will pick up on something that I didn't pick up on. And you have that moment as an adult in the room where you're like, I could totally just be like, "Psh, yeah, I noticed that, of course." Or be like, wow, that's really great that you pointed that out. I didn't catch that.
yeah.
And early in my career, I'd do the first one, and anymore, I tend to do the second one because young people are brilliant.
I'll
Absolutely.
tell you another story. You're so right. This is, I hadn't thought about this one in years, and this is very early in my I guess, career of school visits. I was at a school in Harlem, and I was visiting a library. This is a school that only had very recently constructed a library. This was the first library this school had ever had, and so this was all, like 10, 12 years ago. And the kids were just packed into this library space, and it made it very hard for me to interact, because I like to walk back and forth if there's an aisle. And there
Hmm.
was this
Hmm.
one little boy who was very close to where I was. I could barely move, and he seemed just completely disinterested in anything I had to say. And I was doing a read aloud, and I was doing this sort of interactive exercise with the kids. I did drawing, then I did another read aloud. And, at the very end, questions, who's got questions? All right. And at this point, he has his hand up. And all right, you know what? I'm just gonna throw caution to the wind, and call on this kid. And just let's see what happens. And
Hmm.
he raises his hands. He said, "How come all of your books start with one character on the page, but then they end with two characters on the page?" And what is, yeah, he's right. That was true for my first book, Boing. It was true for Bad Kitty, which I probably read to them. A book I did called Who is Melvin Bubble. It he was right. He
Uh-huh.
absolutely 100% nailed it. And I don't think this kid had made eye contact with me or what was happening on the screen at all. At least I didn't think he had. But
Yeah.
clearly, he was just absorbing everything in his own way.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it was a glorious moment. I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know what the audience is taking in, and how it's
Yeah.
processing. Yeah. So before we have to slide out, I'm on one of those unfortunate personal time Zooms, which
Ah,
also leads to the shorter episodes at times. Uh, it's one of those things.
I can respect it.
So I always like to ask, more Bad Kitty, more projects on the way, future
Yes.
things. Yes. Good, good,
Yes.
good, good.
So by the end of this year, there will be Bad Kitty Makes a Movie. It'll be a chapter book.
Love it.
Um, that I've already, and that will also, I'm also working, or I've already completed the Bad Kitty. I'm doing these sort of early reader picture books. So, and there's going to be Bad Kitty um does not like Easter, and Bad Kitty goes to the beach. Those are already done. They're in the can, they're ready. And what I'm currently working on, I'm really still at the outlining manuscript process, will be Bad Kitty Dog Party. I did a book called Happy Birthday Bad Kitty. It was the second chapter book I ever did about Kitty. And this one's going to be almost like a follow up to that one, because it's going to be about the dog's having a birthday. It's his first birthday.
Nice.
And
Nice.
so it's really a little bit about sibling rivalry, because it's the dog's special day, and Kitty doesn't really like that one bit. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much it.
Very cool. So more on the way. And I love the early reader, chapter book, picture book. I love the range.
Thank
that
you.
you're exploring in. So
Thank you.
that's wonderful, and lots of things for readers to enjoy.
And I guess I should add, fingers crossed, I don't know when or if we'll ever see it. There's real hope for a Bad Kitty streaming series.
Wonderful, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. Branding, all of the
Yeah.
branding. All right. Well, my fingers are crossed for that as well.
Thank you.
Wishing you best success in sharing even more stories and more of the unfolding universe. And thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me.
Thank you, Jason. This was tremendous fun. I enjoyed this a lot.
As did I. As did I. Glad to have you back anytime.
Great.
Thank you.